The miners' strike was the first time I ever met Allan Armstrong. We met in the miners' support group in Edinburgh. We knew each other. We weren't close comrades at that point, but I met him again during the miners' strike. During the poll tax, when we were both involved in organising community resistance to the poll tax, and he was very insightful about what was really going on. That it wasn't just that the whole struggle around the poll tax involved a national issue, the question of Scottish identity and national self-determination, and also the fact that we were being practiced on by the Westminster state, that we were kind of second-class citizens. And so I get involved in grassroots politics in Scotland. I get involved with Republicans. I'm starting to do things like going on the Connolly March, reading John Maclean, things like that. And at this point, I'm very, very close to Allan. We form various groups where we try and bring Republicans and Socialists together. We were in a very good group called the Red Republicans, and also after the poll tax, groups like the Militant Tendency began to talk about setting up a new party, bringing the left together in Scotland, which we did in the Scottish Socialist Alliance. That would be about 1989, something like that.
Yeah, I was interested in the SSP because just the way it sort of, I think it ties to my book, the fact that there was that sort of all these cultural activities, and I've sort of went back, seen some of that stuff, and you kind of responded to it or copied it as well and synthesized it, and then I think added to what I'd copied. That that didn't just come out of nowhere. Obviously, there was there was a kind of cultural and historical debate, but this was representing sort of political factions and stuff like that, wasn't it?
Yeah. And just to give a little bit more back, I mean, I think certainly myself and Allan Armstrong, people who were connected to a kind of Republican tradition as well as a socialist tradition, we drew on experiences of the Irish struggle for self-determination, and the South African struggle for self-determination, realizing that the cultural element, there was a war over culture, what was valid, I mean, in the UK, there's a very kind of bourgeois culture, and working class culture is denigrated, and so it was about realizing that culture and pride in one's class background, in one's broader national background, was really important in political development, and so in Scotland, there was quite a cultural revival. People like Jim Kelman, Alistair Gray, people like that, and kind of music, a lot of music, Dick Gaughan, people like that. That there was a kind of cultural strength in our culture here, and in our communities, that we could draw on, and it was a culture. It was very much a left-wing culture and a culture of resistance. And during the poll tax, people were always writing songs that were kind of against the poll tax, and we had a lot of communities that had been fairly moribund. The one that I lived in, a place called Prestonfield in the southeast of Edinburgh, was a cultural desert before the poll tax. But after that, we had a lot of social events, parties, fundraisers, street activity, things like that. And the whole culture was quite a conservative working class culture before the poll tax. And it went from that to talking about, blocking railways and things. So the government was faced with this rebellion led by people they'd never heard of. And it was powerful. We could, we had demonstrations of tens of thousands, if not more. All that stuff led to the founding of the SSP, well, the SSA as it was, which was very broad. Just about everybody on the left in Scotland got involved in that, apart from the SWP, who remained aloof from it, because as far as they're concerned, they were the party, I think. But most of the rest of us piled in into that. So there was anarchists, there was Trotskyists, there was Orthodox communists, there was Republicans, and over a period of time, a reasonably democratic culture was formed within that arena. Obviously the militant were the biggest organisation. Initially, I would say they weren't all that democratic, but they learned and and we had the struggle for republicanism and a democratic culture within the SSA was really important. And the group that me and Allan were in, the RCN, the Republican Communist Network, played a very big role in that. Although we weren't a very big group, we played a very important role in that. And the people who joined the RCN tended to be refugees from various left-wing groups who've been quite politically scarred by that experience, but still held to a kind of understanding the necessity of kind of socialist transformation of society. And one of the things that grew out of our talking about our experiences was the trying to find forms of struggle that were humanizing, and that had a cultural element. So, at our meetings, we would share food. At our meetings, we would sing songs. People would write and bring some of their work to the meetings and say, I've been trying to write that. Of those people, Allan was by far and away the most prolific, but quite a lot of us wrote. And we had weekends away where we sang. We talked politics, but we also there was a very strong cultural element about singing, eating, dancing, drinking. It was a really good, positive thing, and we punched above our weight in the SSP. There's a couple of more things I wanted to say about the kind of culture of the SSP, kind of in its heyday. One was it was actually a lot of young people involved in it, which I think made it a very vibrant party. And also there was things like we had our own newspaper, the Scottish Socialist Voice, which eventually went weekly, which I think was quite an achievement for quite a relatively small party. I think at its peak, we probably had 3,000 members. The Voice was good, but it could have been more broad. I mean, there was the editorial board was still kind of old militant in a way, and maybe that's a slight injustice, but it could have been more open, I think, to debates. But nevertheless, it was good. And also, there was a developing interest in radical education in the SSP. We had quite a lot of people who had a community education background. People were interested in Paulo Freire, for example. This was another element of the culture, was beginning very directly to explore the writings of people like James Connolly, John Maclean, people like that, and to study Scottish working class history for ourselves. And we were lucky that we had people in the party who had quite a deep knowledge, Allan Armstrong being one of them, and we had, he took part in some really important debates from a kind of Scottish Republican and internationalist perspective with people from other factions within the SSP. If you think the comrades from Militant had come on a very long journey from being in a kind of unionist, labourist kind of party, to breaking away from that and creating Scottish Militant Labour as an autonomous Scottish Socialist Party. So they'd come a long way, and were looking to debate. And there was several different magazines, not just The Voice, but there was the different factions produced magazines, periodicals. Like there's one called Frontline, produced by people who had been in the militant. That was very good. We had what was that called? Republican Communist was our magazine, which later became Emancipation and Liberation. And we had lots, and we had people in the RCN who were like artists and things, filmmakers and things like that, and singers. Of course, we had Mary McGregor's fabulous singer as well. And Alan McCombs from the Milton was a really good singer. Colin Fox could sing. It was part of the party culture, especially when we had socials after conferences and all that. We might have been arguing with each other during the day, having quite heated arguments, but socially people mixed, and it was at its height, it was a very convivial party, I think, at its height. So I suppose that those were the things I wanted to say about the culture.
So
It was very much in development. So,
yeah,
yeah.
what was the kind of content of the magazines and the newspapers?
Well, a lot of stuff about what was going, political. There would be things about current campaigns, like Timex, for example, or the G8, or things like that. And there would be historical pieces about Scottish history, or there would be stuff about songs. People would write about the origins of certain songs. What was the meaning? There'd be stuff about Burns, people like that. The Covenanters. There would be history. There would be contemporary stuff, but there would be history and almost philosophical, or sort of, theoretical contributions, like my one about Marx and did he change his mind and all that, so it was accessible, what it wasn't written, none of them were written in highly theoretical language, but they contained important points and debates uh, uh, between comrades from different traditions, one I think you've referred to in the past as debate between Jerry Cairns and Allan, about the importance of the Covenanters and things like that, and what was the attitudes of the people, the clansmen who supported Bonnie Prince Charlie? Were they blind royalists, or did they actually have an agenda of their own that they thought might be progressed by supporting the Jacobite cause, things like that. Stuff about the wars of independence, the importance of Bruce, and even more important, it would have been argued by some comrades, Wallace, you know that Wallace, organised the common people in many ways, as opposed to the aristocracy, things like that. The kind of red thread that you can find in Scottish history, the going back to the Declaration of Arbroath, the right to overthrow the king, or things like that. Quite radical stuff. The 1820 uprising, things like that. Links stuff about Ireland, a lot of stuff about Ireland, trying to learn from the Irish struggle, not just Irish struggle, but other, the Black Panthers. We were trying to draw on the struggles of working people internationally, both in the present and in the past. It was quite a bubbling ferment of ideas, and we were all learning. We were all learning, and the thing about education was, we would have day schools on Connolly, or day schools on Scottish history, or it was quite something in its heyday, the SSP. and it attracted people. It attracted writers. The Proclaimers gave us money, for example. At one point, uh, it attracted the best in Scottish working class culture, and beyond that, there was quite middle class people who had contributions to make. It drew the best in Scottish society, I would say.
I
So
mean, like if you're in England and kind of politics comes up, do people think you're weird or anything? That you've got these beliefs for
well, yeah,
Scottish
they do. Yeah,
independence.
they do.
Yeah.
Yeah, they think I'm a nationalist. Point one. That Scottish people hate the English sort of almost as a reflex. I think there is, and they just don't. The thing about, I mean, I think I can say this because I'm English, right? Is that if you compare English socialists to Scottish socialists or Irish socialists or Welsh socialists, English socialists, as a generalization, have a much lesser understanding of their own radical history. They don't talk about the Chartists, they don't talk about, they have a misunderstanding of the Luddites, which of course Marx had a misunderstanding of the Luddites. But and going back to the Levellers, the Levellers in the English Revolution, I remember coming across the term the English Revolution in during the miners' strike. I read something by Christopher Hill. I think it was called the English Revolution, and I'd never heard of the Cromwellian era being described as a revolution. Despite the fact that they chopped the king's head off. I hadn't really thought of it like that. It was presented to me as Cavaliers versus Roundheads, and the Cavaliers, no, the Roundheads were all really boring and cut down the maypoles, whereas the Cavaliers were all having parties and they had long hair and they were fun. It was very much presented that way rather than so. And I hadn't heard of the Levellers. I mean, the Levellers were absolutely amazing. Uh, you know, plebeian force that was democratic and refused to go to Ireland. When Cromwell said, we're going to go to Ireland. They said, no, we're not going to go and do the Irish, what we've been fighting against here in England, and it was an amazing stance that they took, but I think the English working class, by and large, don't have a sense of their own history, their own radical history, you know, they think that the Labour Party was an advance when actually after the Chartists, it was a step back, I would say, in that, the one that radical democratic thrust that the Chartists had embedded in the working class. Uh,
Can you tell me about the Declaration of Calton Hill?
yeah. Well, I'm doing this from memory, all of this from memory. But when was the opening of the Scottish Parliament, I think it was opened by the Queen, and so I always thought that was actually an outrage. That it's our Parliament, and it's still one of the good things about the Scottish Parliament was it's a single chamber. There's no House of Lords, nothing like that. That's really good. That's democratic, and it didn't have a lot of the trappings of Westminster. That kind of feudal stuff. But then we get and there's not. If you go to the Parliament, it's got all this democratic aspirations. Carved into the framework, literally. But then we got the Queen opening it. So some of us decided we needed to have a counter demonstration, a counter festival to that, and so we had this idea of the Declaration of Calton Hill. Calton Hill in Edinburgh looks down on the Parliament, and I suppose we probably wanted to be a little bit threatening. Look, we're above here.
The Highland
uh,
Charge or something?
yeah, 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 and so yeah, so we wanted this democratic statement of intent, a Republican statement of intent, saying this is what this is. This is the another Scotland is possible, a democratic Scottish Republic at least. And basically get off your knees and stop kowtowing to these people. So yeah, so that was the idea. And actually, on the day, it was actually a big festival. We had lots of speakers. We had people like Tam Dean Byrne, the famous actor, came and dressed up and did stuff. People singing, dancing, making speeches. It was quite a festival atmosphere compared to the sort of dour drone that you could hear down in the Parliament. Although I think was a woman whose name I can't. She sang "A Man's a Man for All That," yeah, which I'm sure the royalists didn't understand what the song's saying, but with the famous line in it, "See yon Berkey called a lord," they wouldn't get that at all, So that was quite funny that they had this sort of Republican song being sang in the Parliament to all these kind of monarchists. Yeah, and of course the Labour Party, Scottish Labour Party, didn't resist any of that. Didn't say no, actually, no, thank you, Your Majesty, we don't need you. So it just shows that kind of servile culture that liberalism represents. And the Calton Hill Declaration was to point to a different kind of future. A peaceful green Republican Scotland. Ecologically sound, without any monarchs, and with the land, the thing about Scotland is the land issue, which is big here. Again, the English work class is a lot more passive about the land question. We've got the right to roam here. In England, I think it's 8% of the land is open to the public. 8%. Yeah, it's ridiculous, isn't it? And that, in a way, that takes me back to where I started, and I talked about my upbringing. In I could be in rural North Yorkshire in 20 minutes from where I was born, and my father, who was a socialist, made it really clear to me when I was a little boy, when we were walking in the countryside. He would say, "Well, all this is ours. This is ours. It was stolen from us, and we'll get it back. We'll get it back." He was quite confident of that. So I was kind of brought up with that idea of the land question and theft that had been stolen from us. And I think that idea that the land is stolen from us and we need to get it back is much more alive in Scotland. And we're just saying, this is an outrage. And this is what happened, things like the Reformation. There's the clearances, and the Reformation was just a big land grab. They just basically stole the land.
You mentioned the SWP a few times, and
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
a certain SWP man whose books that I had an interest in, Neil Davidson. So
Oh, Neil,
you
yeah,
set up this whole picture of the 90s and the early noughties. There's all this stuff happening, and you're kind of against his his politics slightly, the SWP. You've said that, but he
yeah,
was
yeah,
someone who
yeah.
wrote these books, and they sparked a few debates.
That's right. Yeah, yeah. And I mean, Neil was a bit of an exception in the SWP. I mean, he was very loyal to the SWP, but he wasn't sectarian in the sense that he was really wanting to debate with other people. And I think if you read Neil's writings, he's coming from a kind of unionist, orthodox Trotskyist kind of perspective, and he's changing as he explores the facts, and he comes up in debates with people like Allan Armstrong. Him and Allan had a very comradely relationship. Yeah, and he was on a journey. I mean, he was an important writer, an important thinker, non-sectarian. It's
Um,
in a loss. He died when he was just about to have that conference, which I was hoping to go to, and I know Allan Armstrong was going to go to and have that So his ideas were changing and developing all the time. And I think, and the same with Allan Armstrong, his ideas were developing and changing. And Karl Marx, this idea that these gurus have all the answers is complete cobblers. And none of these thinkers would say, "Yes, I've got all the answers." They would say, "No, read what I've written and think for yourself." And I think that's important. You know, yeah.
This is just a spur of the moment question, but like why is it that people feel the need to name somebody and say this is the hero who knew it all, and now all we can know is the stuff that he's written down?
Yeah, I think that's my answer. Would be one of the most difficult things to do, and I think this applies particularly to men in Western Europe, is to take responsibility, is to say, you know, I've got, the world is a difficult place. I've got responsibility for trying to change it for the better, and I'll do my best, by thinking about theory, trying to put things into practice. It's much easier and less scary, I think, psychologically scary to say, you know, here's somebody, they've got the answers, I'll follow them. You know, I think it's a psychological thing. And I think part of that is the way we're educated. We're educated to believe in genius and gurus, and that we're not encouraged to think for ourselves. It's the opposite of, my wife's a com-ed, or she was a com-ed teacher. She used to contrast education for domestication versus education for liberation. And the state school system is education for domestication. As when I did teacher training for a while, and one of my colleagues, in inverted commas, said, in my old school, why are you here? They're just creating fodder for the factories. And
Yeah.
that's true, it's about. So, and one of the exciting things about the SSP was that we were starting to think about education, about deconditioning ourselves to, and rebuild, remaking ourselves as better socialists and better human beings. So I think that's part of the answer, Johnny. Is that people don't want to take responsibility; they want somebody else to say, "This is the answer. Just do what I say, and everything will be fine." Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that's what
Um,
Reich, Wilhelm Reich, that's what he's getting at in his work. Yeah.
yeah, I think
So
about him
he's
all
really
the
important.
time. You said it was your least favorite book by him, Listen Up, Little Man, but I thought it was
Yeah, I must.
incredible, to
Maybe I
be
should reread.
honest.
Maybe I should reread it. Yeah, yeah. Listen, little man. Yeah, yeah. Which I didn't realize at the time was actually aimed at Hitler. I mean, I read
Right.
it in my very early 20s. It's a long time ago, and I didn't like it. No, I didn't like it. No. But I should maybe go back to it.
I might just sort of mention the two books here that I've got written down by Neil. Um, there's one that came out in the year 2000, The Origins of Scottish Nationhood, and then there's
Yeah,
one from 2003, Discovering the Scottish Revolution,
yeah. I've read the
1692.
first one. I've read.
Hmm.
I've read the first one, but I haven't read the second one.
I mean, it's just to say, like, the first one sort of how to put it into just a few words. It's a theory. It presents a theory that Scotland didn't really exist long ago in the medieval, and that it's only after the union with England that Scotland properly became a nation. But I would say
That's right.
it's quite a dry book. Like it
Right.
was maybe written for people in other countries, and probably a far cry from the magazines and stuff that we were talking about
Yeah.
earlier, or maybe not.
There is a strand of Marxism that declares that countries, nations only really nations are a product of capitalism. That they only really arise, as a product of capitalist development. But if you look at Scotland, after the wars of independence, it clearly has a sense of itself as not England, at least, and not Ireland. It's got a sense of itself. And I think even Neil, I think Neil starts to change his mind on that. I think he starts to talk about proto nations and things like that.
Mm-mm.
I mean, there is a truth that, the Scotland of Bruce was dynastic, it was about his dynasty, and same as Edward Longshanks, the talk. I was watching somebody talking at Bannockburn the other day, and they kept talking about Edward Longshanks as being English, but actually he spoke Norman French, and he wouldn't have thought of himself as English. So there is some truth in that, but there's a lot to be worked through there, I think, and I think Neil was working through that, helped by Allan, helped by his debates with Allan and people like Jerry Cairns, who were thinking it more from a Scottish Republican perspective, and a democratic perspective.
His next book was Discovering the Scottish Revolution, 1692 to 1746, and I had a look at Scottish History for Dummies, and there's a chapter, or I think it's maybe a part, called The Unmaking of Scotland, 1692 to 1746. The dates might be a couple of years different in the Scottish History for Dummies, but it's such a unusual angle for him to take. Just my idea of it kind of improved. I was a bit hard on it for a while, but as I kind of read it properly again, I thought, I was a bit hard on it first time round. But
Yeah,
it did win a Deutscher Prize, which
yeah, that's right. Yeah,
uh,
that's right, yeah.
what is the Deutscher Prize even, Bob?
Yeah, the Deutsche Prize is named after Isaac Deutscher, who was Trotsky's biographer. Uh, I don't know where the money came from. Maybe it came from Isaac Deutsche. I don't know, but it's named after Isaac Deutsche. Yeah, he was a Trotskyist. Yeah, and Neil would very much see himself in a sort of Trotskyist, I think, tradition, whereas Alan would see himself in a Scottish internationalist, Scottish Republican, internationalism from below uh, perspective. But that's why it was good to see them debate. They're both very knowledgeable. But yeah, and I think Neil was changing a lot. I think he was, because the thing about, I think Alan believed and I believe, the thing about revolution and radical change, it's got to be firmly grounded in culture, almost in the actual soil. So a Scottish revolution would be different to an English revolution or a French revolution or a Russian revolution. The idea is to acknowledge our differences, but also our similarities. And, that thing about the importance of diversity, instead of all trying to be the Bolshevik party, right? Uh, we should be more like the Zapatista, who created their own indigenous revolutionary viewpoint. It's something like that. We should be more
What
like the Zapatista, I think.
like why this is just another spur of the moment question. Like why like it sounds like you look back at this time and in a positive way, and there's people who are there's disagreements and debates and stuff, but ultimately it's happening within cooperation, and there's
Yeah.
disagreements, but ultimately you know shake hands afterwards and continue to cooperate, like, so what how can that kind of thing be more widespread?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that came out of the SSA was realizing that none of us had all the answers, right? So it's that idea. It goes back to Socrates and the Socratic dialogue. We have a thesis, an antithesis, and we have a higher thesis that we learn from each other, and that life is an open process of learning, and that a political party should see itself as an open process of change, and encourage diversity and comradely conduct. One of the things that the RCN was very big on was comradely conduct.